Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and as promised, we are going to watch Bill Gates and his friends, his super best friends, if you will, at the World Economic Forum virtual meeting where they are going to discuss carbon markets. Carbon markets. Wait a minute, I thought that this idea of a carbon tax has now been around for really 20 plus years, almost 30. And again, they've tried to put it into action, but no bueno, no mas. It doesn't seem to happen. Now, you have to ask yourself if these people that have now been pushing this agenda forward via what? Globalization, world government, Davos in particular, and all these other different think tanks, media modus operandi as well. You don't think they would use, I don't know, COVID-19 84 as an excuse for a great reset? Probably on behalf of love, though, right? I don't want to get too lovey-dovey on this one like we did in the last one. But again, Bill Gates has been telling you he's going to save the world from so many things for such a very, very long time. Now, I haven't watched this yet, but I would assume that the pandemic will be brought up. It's not just Bill Gates, and we're actually going to watch this one cold. Okay, not like the Kerry one where I kind of jumped around and I just did Kerry. But before we get there, I also want to play this clip from Sky News. Now, we've played other clips from Sky News. This happens to be a separate anchor. I think, what was it, Rowan Dean? Somebody different from him, also covering what the Great Reset is. And I think that this guy, in like 4.5 minutes, spot on nails it. Buckle up, thumbs the video up, subscribe and share, because this one is going to be a long one. Guys, without you couldn't do it. The Go Get funding is how we have to do it. Why? Because GoFundMe kicked me off. Who knows how much longer we're even going to be on this platform. So if you can, thank you so much. If you have, thank you even more. Thumbs the video up, subscribe, and share. Look, I want to be on this platform for as long as possible. I got my first warning on a Mixed Martial Mindset episode with John Fitch because we dared to play Ron Johnson's Senate hearing where Dr. Corey talked about something that apparently doesn't love you. If you want to know a little bit more about that, go check out my Friday Fun video where I'm dancing like John Travolta in the thumbnail. Hope you guys are enjoying the thumbnails. Just saw you in the chat, Steve from Slow News Day. Great show. Also on the Rockfin, by the way. We're going to get to the Rockfin in a moment. All the documentary films, Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture are free right here, right now. Shade in particular, one you're going to want to watch if you want to understand about Bill Gates, how he wants to save the world, and he's a part of many a good guy club. Rockfin. We will be live tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Remember, if we don't end up doing it live, still look for a live, or not live, well, it will be live. I always live stream. A live and free exclusive over here. And, in a week or two, what we do is we take these free ones right here. A lot of them, like this one, YouTube pulls video, claims medical misinformation. In fact, that's how you find out about Dr. Corey. I don't want to play that on YouTube because it's a little too hot and spicy, right? So all that stuff's there. Make sure to make that free account and check out those videos. Odyssey, thank you for backing everything up. And let's get to it, my friends. So what we're going to do is we're going to play this Sky News clip because, again, this guy's bang on.
Some of you may have heard of the Great Reset. That's the hiding in plain sight agenda of the World Economic Forum. They're one of the globalist institutions staffed by leftist elites that want to dictate how you live your life that I mentioned earlier.
See, I'll tell you right now, I don't love the part about leftist elites. No, 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 no. These people are also big time warmongers. They're really fascists. Okay, but let's not label them as anything more than minions and members of a predator class agenda. We'll take a little disagreement there.
It was started by a chap named Klaus Schwab, who's run what is the equivalent of the Woodstock for the super rich and super powerful, Davos, for many, many years. Davos is on now, although there are fewer private planes parked there this year than normal. And it's not because they're practicing what they preach and they've all gone green.
Yeah, look at, I mean, exactly. The hypocrisy has and always will be over the top. They don't care about you. You think they care so much about the environment? First of all, they never talk about the military impacts of the environment, which outweigh all the corporate ones and all the ones that bad humans like you take part in.
And ditch the gas guzzlers, but it's because of coronavirus. The hypocrisy of these so-called leaders jetting in to lecture about the need to take urgent action on climate change by reducing emissions is positively laughable if they weren't so serious about making you pay the price. And the problem was that too many people were starting to laugh at the preposterous climate claims, most notably about humanity only having 5 years left to live on Earth.
Well, they always move the goalposts, right? You know, when I was a kid, it was like 20 years, and then it was 10 years, and now it's 12 years, or it's, 4 years. Who knows what they're going to tell you next? Who knows what they're going to tell you next? But again, this guy establishes that give me a break. These are the doomsayers, right? That's why we played, and we will play again. Not tonight, but we will play again last year. Now, a little over a year ago, when Trump called them doomsayers, okay, and what they really want is command and control.
These claims, of course, were updated every 4 years or so to kick the annihilation plan down the road. And no one, or should I say with half a brain, can take them seriously anymore. So in the face of that mockery, a new plan was hatched, this time using coronavirus as the justification to make the very same changes. They've changed the title though. It's now called the Great Reset. And here is what the WEF Ubermeister has to say about it.
Let's just stop it there for a second. And he's right. This is all repackaged garbage. It's all the same exact agenda. And that's why, again, all this stuff is about climate change and climate markets and really outward fascism. Outward fascism.
So in terms of changing our mindset, and here what is at the forefront is to create a new model, a new concept, a new definition of capitalism. Capitalism in the old definition comprises only financial capital, but actually human and social capital is and of course natural capital is as important as
the great.
Let's just stop it right there. So he's telling you social credit score, and again, they're acting as though kindness and benevolence and what a good person you are, that's social, it's good, that's the kind of capital we need. These people are sociopathic. I mean, let's call them what they are. Murderers. These are the people, okay, that decide who lives and dies via global conflicts. They are heavily invested in the media, military industrial complex. Make no mistake about it. Make no mistake about it. And they're the ones that are going to impose a moral value set. No, it's going to be about obedience. Obedience will be your social capital. You'll own nothing. They don't want you to have ownership of anything. This is the ultimate obedient slave agenda. that they have wanted for a very long time, and that man sits up there and cackles about it. You know, no one gets to judge you on your morality if you've never physically, taken. Again, there are laws for a reason. Let's just say that. But at the end of the day, if you believe in a God or whatever, that's the only judgment you should seek, not Klaus Schwab and a gang.
Reset is only a new term to mask their previous failures to control economic and social foundations. The World Economic Forum is just a cabal of climate crusaders and social engineers. They think they know what is best for the rest of us. It's a veritable who's who of people you should actually be very concerned about. Prince Charles, Al Gore and climate child Greta Thunberg are among their throng. So is the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President of the European Central Bank, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, George Soros, World Trade Union leaders, chief executives of all the big tech companies, and representatives of non-government organisations like Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund. Bizarrely, so too is Australian Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young.
Before we get to Sarah, where is the reporting in this country like that? I mean, he missed some key names. He missed Kevin Trudeau, right? He missed Gates himself and all these other. He missed now, John Build Back Better Kerry and the Biden crew. He missed a lot, but I mean, he's nailing it. Where is this in our country? Where my country gone?
She even appears prominently on their website. Now, it says a lot when a senator elected to represent South Australia is on the anti-capitalist website featuring some of the greatest hypocrites in our lifetimes. It might even give you some cause for concern. Perhaps you could raise them with the senator. But having worked with her in the Senate, I will only say that birds of a feather do indeed tend to flock together. Or let me put it another way. You're much braver than me if you entrust your future to that lot. And yet, that is what more and more governments are actually doing. They're signing on to this transparently totalitarian agenda that threatens to change our business, our social and our educational interactions.
Literally a totalitarian agenda. He's not mincing words. I'm not mincing words. I'm not over-exaggerating. He just laid it right out there. This is a totalitarian agenda. My God. And you won't see this in our country. You won't. I mean, Davos is the happy, fun place where Mr. Gates saves the world. Don't worry, I can't wait. It's going to be a raw watch, guys. Thumbs it up, subscribe, and share. We don't even get 100 thumbs up. Let's do it. Let's let him wrap it up right here.
But totalitarianism has always been a hallmark of the leftist. They want control and power because they think they know better than you do how you should live your life. And nothing they're doing today is entirely new. It is merely cloaked in a different garb.
Nothing's new. It's not new at all. None of this is new. Zero. Zip. Zilch. You get it? You got it? Good.
History shows that they will use whatever means are at their disposal to attain the end that they desire. They've employed the same tactics to captivate and convince others of the merits of this approach, with the end result being a disaster for all concerned.
All right. So now, are you ready? Because we're going to do it, and we're doing it live. Here it is. Bill Gates saves the world.
Welcome to this session, Carbon Markets, a conversation with Bill Gates, Mark Carney, Annette Nazareth, and Bill Winters. My name is Nicole Schwab. I'm the co-director of the Platform to Accelerate Nature-Based Solutions at the World Economic Forum, and I will be your moderator for this session. We are delighted to have you here with us for the launch of the final recommendations of the Task Force for Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. This
voluntary.
task force was launched in the fall of 2020 to answer the following critical question. How can we build well-functioning voluntary carbon markets that can support net zero and carbon negative climate goals?
Listen, does any of this agenda that they're trying to drive through sound like it's going to be voluntary for you? Does it? Am I the only one that thinks that's kind of imagination land? I mean, right out of the gates. Just totally putting it in your face. Is this the agenda you're at? Are you asking, demanding for net zero carbon?
The group consists of 50 of the key industry experts, as well as another 150 experts in a consultation group who serve to challenge the recommendations throughout the process. With us today to talk about voluntary carbon markets and the task force, we have a fantastic lineup. We have Mark Carney, UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, and the initiator of the task force work.
Climate action and finance. and you know, John Kerry in his talk, I believe it was later on, I didn't play that part, I was getting a little sick to my stomach. He was talking that we have to have a military style approach to this. Remember that Prince Charles is talking about a Marshall Plan, aka military style approach to this.
Bill Winters, Group Chief Executive of Standard Chartered Bank and Task Force Chair. Annette Nazareth, Senior Counsel at Davis Polk and former U.S. Securities and Exchange Commissioner and the operating lead of the task force. And Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft and co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
God love him. He's here to save the world.
We will spend the next 30 minutes to dive into the recommendations of the task force with our panel. And if time allows, we will try to take a few questions from the audience. So please use the chat function to send us your questions and comments. And if you are watching this session on social media or the website, you can also share your reflections with the hashtag WEF21 or hashtag Davos Agenda. So with that, let's go straight to the heart of the matter, and let me turn to you, Mark. What is the role of offsets in the context of a 1.5 degree climate ambition?
Well, thank you, Nicole, and let me compliment the leaders of this task force. It's a remarkable achievement.
You know what? I'm so glad that he did that. I mean, how much back patting and ass patting and rubbing are we going to be seeing in this?
First thing to say is that this carbon budget is very precious. On business as usual, so pre-pandemic emissions, we have less than a decade of a carbon budget to remain within 1.5 degree temperature increases. So it is a limited carbon budget. And in that context, really a voluntary carbon offset market does four things. The first, it's complementary, I underscore that, complementary to companies' efforts to reduce absolute emissions. Companies' responsibility, first and foremost, is to reduce their absolute emissions. And as the report says, they need to first reduce, then report, including net zero plans. And I'm sure we'll get into the specifics of that. And then, only then, look to offset. The second thing that this does is it is catalytic. It's catalytic not for renewable projects in many advanced economies where the economics are absolutely clear, they are profitable and they will be driven, but they're catalytic for projects that many of which are in emerging and developing economies where the economics are not yet quite there, and this can help tip the balance for those projects to come in. These offsets can also be catalytic as part of helping the economics of absolutely essential breakthrough technologies that need to happen for us to ultimately get to net zero. And I'm sure that will come up more clearly because Bill Gates has led on those technologies. The third thing is this market is cross-border. This market is being driven, it's a voluntary market, but it's being driven by companies making these net zero commitments. Most of those companies, the vast majority of those companies are in the G7 advanced economies, so-called advanced economies. They will be looking for high quality, high integrity offsets. And most of those offsets will come from emerging and developing economies. So this is a potentially huge cross-border flow. And then the last thing, and I'll hand back to you, Nicole, is that this market has the potential, properly structured, to have enormous co-benefits. Co-benefits for biodiversity, co-benefits for other SDGs, although rooted in a high integrity, highly credible, open, transparent carbon offset market.
Biodiversity. What did I hear there? I heard a lot of assurances that this was going to be voluntary. Okay? And then they said it would basically be complementary to other drivers. Then he basically talked about these markets being within G7 countries as though they were one adopted agreement. Well, how would they be one adopted agreement if they were voluntary? It is all about selective enforcement. But at the end of this, he keeps talking about new and emerging technologies. They don't want you to have technologies that empower you. They want technologies that empower themselves, the predator class, and give them an excuse to enslave you. Have you figured it out yet?
Thank you, Mark. Let me turn to you, Annette. So we understand the importance of getting to net zero, but the voluntary carbon markets are not new. However, until now, they haven't achieved scale. Can you tell us what is different about this initiative and how it is going to help us achieve the Paris ambition?
Sure, thanks, Nicole. Well, you're correct that there is a voluntary market that is already operational. And it has made strides in terms of credit integrity and transparency and efficiency since its earliest days. That said, from experience, we know that there are structural challenges that need to be addressed. In our blueprint, we set out 6 topics for action with 20 underlying recommendations that we believe will materially enhance the market to make it more robust and transparent and further increase the quality and environmental integrity of carbon credits and their use. Each of these topics for action and recommendations are important levers, but to me, the 3 most important elements that will really help us achieve our goals are quality, governance, and legitimacy.
Want to stop it right there. Quality, governance, and legitimacy. Voluntary markets. Okay? Number 1, look how bad this is that they're reading off bad scripts, right? Like at this point, they don't even really have to memorize their talks. They just kind of have their talking points there. You can see her looking off to the side. This old woman is going to tell you and your family that we need governance for voluntary markets. Come on now.
Quality comes through the development of a set of core carbon principles, which we refer to as the CCPs, and additional attributes.
Did you hear that? I mean, that's kind of ironic. The CCPs. I mean, you can't make that up. That's the quality, the CCPs. I mean, for those that don't get it, the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, listen, I'm not sitting here. You know, this isn't about China because this is about globalization, right? And the irony is that China's not going to curb their carbon emissions no matter what we say. Why? Why? Because, hey, man, they got surveillance. They got a social credit score. They'll ease that in. But they'll command and control this as much as possible.
These principles set out threshold quality criteria to which a carbon credit and the supporting standards and methodologies should adhere. This is a foundational step to ensure quality and also for forming the basis for reference contracts. Reference contracts will in turn drive liquidity and price transparency and allow more high-quality projects to be financed. The second element, governance, is critical. We have to get a governance body in place to oversee the CCPs.
A governance body in place to oversee the CCPs. I'm just going to leave that one right there.
This should include embedding transparency, standard setting, and oversight of verification of emissions reductions from projects. It will also include ensuring projects boost biodiversity and carbon capture while respecting community and land rights. And beyond overseeing credit level integrity, a governance body should oversee participant level and process level integrity as well. And finally, legitimacy. We focused on developing a strong and legitimate demand signal. Nothing will happen unless demand is in place. But having said that, organizations need guidance and clear standards on when offsetting is legitimate. We need to see transparent climate commitments from firms that include how much offsetting they plan to do in the coming years. Companies should publicly disclose commitments, detailed transition plans, and annual progress against these plans to decarbonize operations and value chains. Industry consortia, similar to CORSIA, for other heavy industry sectors can also move the needle significantly. And clear and aligned narrative on offsets and what claims corporates can make will also help drive demand.
They're talking about driving demand for a marketplace where these corporations pay into a tax system for offsets of carbon emissions. Meaning, if they pollute, they give more money or whatever credit system they want. It will be another scam market, just like the market's been exposed, right? If anything's good about the GameStop, AMC, Nokia, BlackBerry scandal, and again, I haven't covered it yet because I'm going to try to get Whitney Webb on it because she's spot on. Because that was a coordinated attack. That was a lot more than what the mainstream media is telling you. But if you haven't figured it out, all these systems are already rigged against the little guy. But we're supposed to give them more command, control, governance, legitimacy into this marketplace when they're not even telling you how these offsets, in other words, this marketplace and money, where it goes, and how it's going to solve the carbon emission problem. It's nonsense. It's Johnny nonsense to the extreme. But don't worry, I'm sure we're going to hear from Bill Gates soon, and he's going to tell you how he's about to save the planet.
So again, quality, governance, and legitimacy are crucial drivers, and I think that those will animate our work in the coming days.
Thank you, Annette. So quality, governance, legitimacy. Let me turn to you, Bill Winters. Why aren't we doing this already? What problems stand in the way, and how does the report address these?
No, I've been around the voluntary carbon markets for probably 30 years, and at various points got very excited about the prospect of this market really taking off. But as Mark and Annette both said, it didn't. It's there, but it's nowhere near as robust as it needs to be to get us to net zero by 2050, which is something that already 1,500 corporations have committed to. I guess that the majority of businesses in the world will commit to that. We've seen countries committing to net zero, but we know that the real carbon mitigation and the carbon reduction is coming from businesses, overwhelmingly from businesses. Of course, individuals and consumers can contribute as well. What do we need to do to get this market properly scaled up? But I think that the first thing that's changed fundamentally is that we've made these commitments. The fact that net zero is even a term, not just a term, but used by 1,500 corporations already, and I guess after this week, it will be many more. If we refer back to letters that are coming from the owners of many of these businesses, I'm thinking specifically about the letter from BlackRock just this week, that makes clear that every corporation in their portfolio will need to have a very clear plan to get to net zero. And in those plans, they'll be very clear that you must start with reductions. And this is really Mark's very first point. Every business has to start, and the bulk of the migration to net zero is going to have to be improving our own carbon intensity, reducing our own emissions. And that's recommendation number one in our task force. And not something that we spend a lot of time on because we're focused on the voluntary market, but clearly reduction has to be first and foremost. But we also know that it'd be very difficult for many businesses to get all the way to net zero, much less carbon negative, as Microsoft has committed.
Carbon negative. Carbon negative. How is that possible? I mean, these terms, if you haven't noticed, are all rooted in a business market. All rooted. He's been in the carbon market almost 30 years. Remember how we talked about how this has been around for almost 30 years? That's what they've been trying to sell you on. And now all this great reset talk is generalized about a new type of capitalism. about lockdowns, about Fauci talking about 2 masks is common sense. Bill Gates and his buddies to save the world.
Without tapping into the offset market. Now, why offsets? Well, offsets are the most convenient and efficient way to migrate the tens of billions of dollars that need to move from the hands of people like my bank, Standard Chartered Bank, into the hands of the people that can actually remove carbon from the environment or structurally reduce carbon in the environment in the most efficient way. In addition, we have the tremendous benefit of creating price transparency, which has all sorts of other benefits, not least in terms of making clear to those of us that are polluting in any way what the cost of that pollution is. So what's different?
So again, hey, if you're polluting, no big deal. What price you paying? Now, any price a corporation pays, they put that price onto the consumer. But since all of this is rooted in carbon, and we are literally beings that emit carbon dioxide, so plants can breathe them, Mother Nature, we're bad too. I mean, the implications of this are utter insanity. And that's why, despite the push, it really has remained on the fringe. And memes about Greta Thunberg, the how dare you stuff. I mean, but now that stuff is just going to get censored and fact checked. I saw Steve was in here. Slow News Day does a video, and somehow it's being fact checked about QAnon. Video's not about QAnon. I mean, how long till that's on my stuff? Again, despite speaking out against the QAnon nonsense and all the Johnny nonsense over the years.
This time, number one, we've got these net zero commitments that have been made. Number two, the stakeholders that are urging us to make these commitments, our owners, our employees, our clients, are intending to hold us strictly to account.
You hear that? He's again, the stakeholders. This is about stakeholder capitalism. You notice how he talked about the bottom up, the employee. You have a stake in it. You're the employee. This guy doesn't care about his employees. Give me a break. So
this idea that you could buy an offset that was occasionally referred to as a greenwashing contract, it's simply not going to work. As Annette went through, we've got, and we spent the last 6 months developing the standards and the standard setting bodies, the governance oversight, to make sure that we are using the latest and best technology, instruments, and with the right level of transparency to be absolutely certain that these carbon offsets or carbon credits that are being created are legitimate, that they're permanent, so it's not here today and gone tomorrow when the forest burns or the tree is cut down. Tracking leakage, so leakage outside of the project in terms of gradual diminution of the effectiveness, and making sure that these projects are additional. Additional meaning these are projects that wouldn't have happened but for the fact that there was a carbon benefit to the climate. So these are the steps that we've taken. As Annette said, 20 recommendations lumped under 6 key themes with 200 participants very actively involved. What we're coming out with today, and I hope everybody gets a chance to read it, is a 17-page executive summary, easy read. You can definitely get through that. The 139-page report you've got to put a bit of time into. But the opportunity for all of us is to take this framework that we put out today and to convert that into an implementable action plan this year so that we can start to see the real benefits of scaling up this market immediately. Because without that, we will not get to net neutral, carbon net zero in 20.
Net neutral, net zero, carbon zero, whatever we're calling it. We need to get the market going. We need to do it this year. The slaves are ready for it. Okay? I mean, we're here to save the world. Bill, jump in. You're wearing a sweater. We want to hear from you.
2050.
Thank you, Bill. Let me now turn to you, Bill Gates, and you are also the founder of Breakthrough Energy. Bill Winters just mentioned technology, and we know that nature-based solutions are going to be a critical part of the solution to achieving net zero. But what else is needed?
Well, I'd say the good news is that a lot of companies are taking carbon into account as they make decisions. They have, some per ton hurdle price. And they, are going to stay away from, investments that are generating carbon because of that price signal. The big step, the next step there is getting people to monetize those things and put that money into things that are provably have an impact. And a number of companies now are willing to do that. Now, some of these offsets are very complicated. Trees, for example, have a 40-year lifetime on average. So to match the carbon residency time, you'd have to replant 250 times. And trees generally grow where there's good soil and good water. And so the number of places where you can do those 250 plantings is very, very small.
The man who loves you and is going to save the world just told you that replanting trees is probably not the answer as an offset, because you need really good soil and you need really good water. And guess what? Mother Nature is no longer good enough. We don't have that, apparently, not only in this country, but around the world. Do you understand how crazy and backwards that is? Again, man, if you've traveled just throughout this country and you realize how many rural areas there are alone here, and how many unspoiled areas there are here, just in the United States, not North America, not South America, not resource-rich Africa, not Australia, not the globe, right? The fix is in. This guy is full of absolute horse shit.
So, over time, the understanding and the quality of these efforts will go up. As I went to do offsets for myself personally, long-term offsets, the prices were about $400 a ton. That's very, very high. And everything we think of here, it's 51 billion tons of emissions. And so everything has to be considered as a percentage of that. For a company that's a electric utility, a steel company, a cement company, any sort of industrial thing, you see the increase in price that they'd have to have is still significant. So innovation is going to be key to this as we do the carbon markets in parallel with funding the innovation activities.
Thank you. Let me turn back to you, Mark. Some say that offset markets are just greenwashing and that it lets companies off the hook, allowing them to buy their way out of doing anything.
I mean, pretty much. Wow. I mean, let's hear the answer to this one. Can't even believe they said that. See, that's why we do it live. That's my reaction. Obviously, kind of a setup question, and this guy's going to have an answer for it, but interesting.
What would you say to that?
Well, I categorically reject it. And I think the part of this is putting companies on the hook. This process that Bill Winters referenced, we have 1,500 of the world's largest companies are now in a position where they're making these commitments. All of a sudden, once you're in making those commitments and participating in the type of offset market that this report recommends, it's not just a commitment. It's a commitment which has a net zero plan, which is rooted in science-based targets, if those are available for your sector. And as those watching will know, that is spreading across the sector. So not just a plan, not something you've written on the back of a napkin, one rooted in science-based target. Annual reporting requirements, that's one of the recommendations in terms of your absolute reductions. And then alongside that, if you are using offsets, well, offsets that come from a market that has the type of transparency and integrity that Annette and Bill Winters have outlined. But
I just listened to him talk for a good minute and a half of bullshit. Right now, I feel like, and it's just a prediction, that he's going to try to legitimize some type of governance to ensure that this ends up being the case, right? That, of course, they're not just going to get off the hook.
Let me just re-emphasize. So there's those elements. It brings companies into it's part of what brings companies into a formal system. And by the way, all stakeholders around those companies will be scrutinizing and have the information they need to scrutinize in terms of absolute reductions and those offsets. But just if I can make one last adjacent point, if I will, which I started with, which is this is about preserving or conserving, maximizing the use of a very limited carbon budget. And what are we supposed to be doing during that time? We need to do two big things. One, we need to turn over the capital stock for proven economic technologies like existing renewables, that solar, wind, and others, to get emissions, absolute emissions down. And secondly, we need to put big money and a lot of focus and a lot of smart people around the type of breakthrough technologies that we need ultimately to get to absolute zero, whether around hydrogen, direct air capture, or sustainable jet fuels. And so we need all of that, which is why I started with this is complementary. It's one piece of the puzzle, but we do need this market.
Thank you, Mark. Annette, I know that you went through a public consultation. So what did the public tell you in the consultation, and what were some of the other concerns that came up, and how did those inform what you will do next?
Thanks for that question. You know, we've been very fortunate to have a very broad engagement for the task force's efforts. Of course, we benefited from the work of a very engaged task force itself, with the members representing a broad cross-section of the value chain. But we also had very valuable input from our consultation group, which I believe we mentioned before, which is composed of subject matter experts from over 120 institutions. So we took all that input, and then we put out a draft report during our consultation process. And we were very pleased to receive over 160 responses during that consultation period. The reception to the report has overall been really quite positive, with 73% endorsing the blueprint and 88% agreeing with the need to implement the 6 topics for action.
So let's just stop right there. First of all, to show how set up and scripted these forums really are, you can see her looking off, and she knew she was going to be talked to about this study. She had all the right answers for it, and she's like, look, you can see almost 3/4 of us want to do this. It's even higher over here. I mean, their own propaganda is absolutely overwhelming.
So, you know, the full debrief of the feedback can be found in the report itself, but some key takeaways for me were on credit quality and governance and reference contracts.
Credit quality and governance. Credit quality and governance. Right? Stakeholders. Stakeholder capitalism. Markets. Man, they really seem so concerned about, you know, your health and how you're going to live and the actual climate itself.
On credit quality, we received feedback from across the value chain that solving the issue on quality, including permanence, leakage, and additionality, which Bill Winters mentioned before, has been highlighted as a top reason for getting mass adoption. On governance, we had 77% agreement for stronger governance for all identified governance needs. And for reference contracts, respondents were in favor of the development of standardized reference contracts, including over 60% of the buyers who responded, who would commit to purchasing through such contracts in the future. So concretely, this input led us to the conclusion that we need to address a few additional steps. First, to drive up quality, we need to get one level deeper on the CCPs, which includes designing specific guardrails per project, for example, renewables only in least developed countries, and to review historic credits to ensure that they would meet the high quality criteria of the CCPs. On the governance process, we have to get more specific on the roles and responsibilities and help propose a way forward for its establishment. And on reference contracts, the task force can help develop the contract templates that will be used by market participants to trade. So again, overall, I think we had a very productive and informative consultation process, and it's certainly going to inform our work going forward.
Constitution process. There's a smug Bill Gates who loves you right there. She talked about governance. Does any of this sound like it's going to end up being voluntary? Sound like voluntary markets to you?
Thank you, Annette. Bill Gates, I have a second question for you. How do you see the role of private sector climate commitments to drive the scaling up of voluntary carbon markets? And what is the risk of getting this wrong?
Well, I think the way forward here is to connect the these private sector payments to innovation. If you just have some wealthy companies that aren't in the industrial sectors where the extra green cost would make their products non-competitive, if they're just dealing with their portion, it's a very small percentage. On the other hand, if you're taking this offset money and you're bootstrapping the markets for the difficult products like green cement, green steel, green aviation fuel, then you can start the learning curve. And as you get that volume and learning curve, then these premiums can come down. Because after all, to be at zero by 2050, all the products that middle income countries buy for shelter and lighting and transport, are going to have to come at such a small premium that they're willing to shift all their purchasing. And so taking the lesson from...
Did you just hear that? You're not going to be able to make money in the middle income countries because you won't be able to, because you can't have a markup, because we're going to tax the private sector voluntarily to that point through this offset market. That's exactly what he said. He fluffed it up a little bit better than that, but tell me where I'm wrong. Bueller? Thumbs this video up, by the way. I know that this is tough, and believe it or not, we're just a little bit more over the halfway mark of the Mr. Gates and Friends Save the World Watch Along.
Solar energy, where country policies drove up those volumes and the prices came down, and now shifting that to the hard areas, including industrial and things like green hydrogen. If we can take this money and start those learning curves, and so we're driving up the volume and causing success and more innovation to get those premiums down, then I see these voluntary carbon markets and the acceleration of innovation through the marketplace as really coming together and giving us that chance of getting to zero.
Thank you. Last question to you, Bill Winters, before we turn to questions from the audience. What are the next steps, and how will the task force strive for fairer representation?
Good question. We spent a lot of time thinking about representation. Annette mentioned the 50-member core task force with another 120 people in a consultation group, and many others that were providing advice or perspectives, including the 160 responses we got to the consultation paper. But there's an overweight in the task force and the consultation group in the developed markets. So we have good representation from Indonesia, from China, from Latin America. But not enough. And when we look at the carbon equation in the world, something like 90% of the practical nature-based solutions, the target areas, are sitting in developing markets. Whereas on the flip side, something like 90% of the natural offset buyers, at least so far, are coming in developed markets. So we wanted to make sure that we balance that out so that we really have both sides of the market represented in the efforts as we get into to finalizing the implementation plans to take this framework and put it into reality. Some have said that the carbon offset market will result in a meaningful transfer of wealth from the developed to the developing economies. There's clearly some truth to that. We know that the developed Economies are ahead, certainly in Europe. They're well ahead in terms of establishing infrastructure and also mindset. And we know that the developing markets, number one, are most exposed to the effects of climate change, but also can have the most important marginal impact from here.
What are these effects of climate change? Marginal impact. You know, it just seems to me there are a bunch of people trying to get on a system where they're going to squeeze out any competition through small margins, and a market where they're saying you can't plant trees to offset anything because the water and the land sucks too much. I mean, that should be alarming to people. Well, I'll admit this, Bill Gates doesn't seem as happy talking about the markets of carbon as he does when he's talking about vaccines and the pandemic.
In terms of improving their emission efficiency. So clearly the key for us is to have this market be as inclusive as we possibly can, and we want to make sure that we bed that down during the implementation phase. So next steps, we obviously are beginning today with the next round of stakeholder engagement. We had really good, strong, robust feedback after the consultation document. These issues are not without controversy. I mean, there are people that have focused on this market for years, and Nicole, your very first question was, why now, and why hasn't it happened before? Well, the reason is it's tough, and we've had to change some things, and the world has had to move on. Now we need to bed that down and take the controversy and resolve it. I think we have a reasonable shot at getting something close to consensus, but there may be some naysayers, and we'll want to make sure that we understand those concerns and factor those into our plans. Second is to get the governance frameworks in place. So we've made recommendations for what the governance should cover. Now we need to actually create the governance body that can, in many ways, be the self-regulating organization for this market and can address the legitimacy and quality issues that you talked about.
A self-regulating global governance over carbon. They've been pushing this for a long time. Remember, go back to the beginning of this video. I know it seems ages ago, but when we play this a long time, same agenda. Why now? He even says, why now?
We need to get the standards agreed, both for the core carbon contract or the core carbon principles, as Annette mentioned, but also for the nature of transactions that are happening outside of the core standards. So, and we'll continue to work on addressing the remaining issues around the integrity of the carbon market, the legitimacy of the market, making sure that we've got the latest and best technologies and capabilities to track the quality of these instruments. And that work has already begun, of course, but will begin now in earnest for the broader population now that our report is out. And we urge the most inclusive possible set of interactions with everyone in this community that all has the same shared interest to get to net zero by 2050.
Thank you, Bill. So you mentioned a number of controversies, and I would like to now turn to the questions from the audience. And I would like to start with a question from Peter Becker from WBCSD. And his question is, in parts of the NGO community, there is a fierce, rather ideological debate underway about refusing the use of offsets to get to net zero. How does the report and the work of the task force help us to break through towards a more pragmatic approach? Who would like to take this question? Mark, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, well, why don't I start and colleagues can jump in. I think the first thing is something we were talking about earlier, which is, and I mean, obviously, having a legitimate market, a high integrity market where the offset is the offset, and things such as the point Bill Gates made about the role of reforestation over the life cycle of reforestation, and being absolutely clear about the transitory nature of that form of offset, subsequent. That's essential, and that gets clear. First point.
So I just want to reiterate this. This guy right here, Mark Carney, just backed Bill Gates up when he said earlier there's a very limited space on the planet, apparently, to replant trees because we don't have rich soil or good water anymore.
Second point, differentiation when it's necessary in types of credits. So either on exchange traded or OTC credits. So it's clear what's being used and the clarity that comes from being in company accounts. Because remember, ultimately, these offsets, and this is one of the core recommendations, not just of this task force, but of the overall COP finance process, is we want climate disclosure in companies' main accounts. So it has that level of integrity. And CEOs and CFOs don't sign off company accounts unless they know that it's real, either on the profit side or on the offset side. But then the process point, this will be my last one, but it's a critical one. And part of this will be finally nailed down with the governance body and the final terms of the market. But there's some leading sense here in terms of the principles in the report, which is if you're going to be participating in this market as a buyer, you can't just show up and buy a few offsets and put them in your window and feel good about yourself. No, you actually have to have a comprehensive net zero plan. And by the way, there are 1,500 companies with net zero plans. Not all of those plans are comprehensive net zero plans, which would meet the standards of those markets today. This will help ensure that those are the case, and then that number increases. And then also, what other requirements will there be for those companies that would include the annual reporting on the plan, the mark-to-market, the relative contribution. So all of that is a way to enhance the legitimacy of this activity. My last point, though, was my first point, and Bill Winters said this, which is we're all looking for the same objective. We're all trying to get to net zero. We need to maximize our possibility of getting to net zero, our probability of getting to net zero. And this is part of the answer, only part of the answer, and it maximizes the ability to turn over the capital stock as quickly as possible and to make the kind of innovations that Bill Gates was talking about a moment ago.
Loves Bill Gates.
Thank
you know what?
Anybody like
those guys? They're super best friends. And they love you. And they're going to save the world through a marketplace that's telling you we're all doomed because we can't plant trees because the water and soil is so bad on the planet.
to add something? Yes, Bill Winters.
I'd very great. Mark, I think summed it up perfectly. But I think clearly at the heart of this question is a concern that the offsets that are created in the first place were never going to deliver the benefits that were hoped for, or that there's slippage after the original agreement. And when you read through our task force recommendations, you'll see that we tried to address those questions very directly, both at the outset and then over the life of the project. But maybe the thing I take most comfort in is, and this is getting back to what's different this time around. Think about the number of people that are watching this time, who weren't watching before. Our owners are watching. Our regulators, if you're in regulated industries, are watching. As Mark says, to the extent that some of these commitments make it into financial reporting, you got auditors who are watching. You got NGOs who are watching. And if you have an orchestrated market, that these credits eventually are being delivered into an exchange, and somebody's on the other side of every one of those trades, and they're watching very, very carefully. And like every other market that we've seen that's managed to get to critical mass, the best way to make sure that people don't cheat is to have lots of eyes on the process from end to end.
Kind of ironic he would say something like this. Lots of eyes. Markets don't cheat. It's all they've been doing recently. You look at the stock market especially, even before this. You remember when the lockdowns were just starting in this country and the markets were crashing and they were literally stopping them. They stopped them several times. So, oh my goodness.
With complete transparency. So at the very heart of our recommendations is finding ways to make that transparency very evident at every stage of the process. And I think if we get that, the confidence that these credits are legitimate, not just now, but through the life of the projects, will soar.
Thank you, Bill. I'd like to bring in a couple of other questions. So this one on a slightly different angle is a question from Jules Kortenhorst, RMI. And his question is, the focus of the report is the market for offsets. But as Bill Gates highlighted, we need to actually establish the pricing of the carbon attributes in the real economy to drive innovation and create the solutions for hard-to-abate sectors.
The real economy.
Do you see the possibility to expand the voluntary carbon market scale-up, move in that direction?
Voluntary.
Would anybody like? Yes, Bill Gates, please.
I think some of the best money ever spent on climate was what Germany and Japan did, buying solar panels when they were still being sold at a high premium cost, which I call the green premium. And so companies' willingness to fund activity, we need
The green premium. Meanwhile, he's telling middle countries that there won't be premiums on their products when this market takes place, the voluntary market that somehow needs governance.
to connect that to the innovation cycle. Because after all, if a green product is very high priced, there's no market for it. But if you drive that volume up, then that price delta can come down. And so I do think that really proving to people that the quality of these offsets is strong, that's over the next few years, we'll do better and better in that. But the other is the idea of this catalytic impact and getting some of this money to go into taking the tough, the hard parts, the high green premium parts, and getting those on the learning curve, and getting companies that do that, buy all their buildings with green cement, green steel, and bootstrap like solar panels. We want to give credit to those companies because that learning curve is the only way that you get the entire market for those products to shift to green.
Thank you.
Again,
Yes.
just to chime in, it's clear in our report that Bill's enthusiasm for this angle is infectious, and we all agree that it's critical that we find ways for the voluntary carbon market to help support these frontier technologies. So it's a central tenet. Now, do we have all the details of that worked out? No, we don't, and that I think will be one of the really important and challenging and interesting issues during the next phase of implementation, is finding a way to get comfortable that we can have the same sort of confidence in these frontier technologies that we have in some of the more established technologies where they have their own questions. But we're all committed to finding a way to do that.
Thank you, Mark. Yes,
If I
please.
can just make one quick point, which sometimes those at the frontier, it's hard for them to realize how far others are behind them. So Jules, I know Jules well, who asked the question. He's at the frontier. He understands these issues intimately, and the financial sector issues intimately, and some of the technologies. Bill Gates, obviously at the frontier, some of these technologies. But one of the things that this architecture, this overall architecture does, companies having net zero plans, clarity on what is and isn't an offset, linkage of those offsets to breakthrough or catalytic technologies, is it shines a huge light on what needs to be done, not over the next few years in terms of currently economic technologies get put in place, but what issues need to be cracked. And Bill Gates referenced some of them, hydrogen, aviation fuel as well. And that will mean brain power, money, activity, innovation flows into that. So we get those technologies in, we maximize our probabilities, a better way to put it, that we're going to get those when we really need them. And that's why we need this as part of the overall architecture. Last point, just to reemphasize, if I'm a company and I'm offsetting, I get to make a decision. How many of my offsets, do I just want to buy the cheapest high integrity offsets, or do I want to buy offsets that also have co-benefits, biodiversity, or co-benefits which are buying down the green premium in some of these key technologies? And I will know which type I bought, and I can disclose it, and people can rely on that. That's what this market can help create.
I think that's a great point, Bill, because
Just so everybody knows, there's only 4 more minutes. I know how painful this is. But they expect you not to watch this. And they know this is all back padding and, just easing you into it and technical jargon. But you do get, some moments, again, where Bill Gates tells you there's no offsets really in replanting trees because our water and our land sucks. So forget about that. You do get the little bits and pieces where he lets you know that second world nations aren't going to be able to make premiums on their stuff. You do get the governance stuff. I mean, I've been watching this crap and it is painful for literally almost 2 decades. Almost 2 decades. I'd say I watched a lot of this stuff even pre 9/11 too. Not at the gears I'm at now.
Mark, because we, what we focused on as well were the additional attributes and being able to determine, in the capital markets that that's where your investment is going to go to that kind of activity is going to be within the, within the remit here. And so I think it's going to, as Bill Gates said, really catalyze these processes as companies decide to employ their resources for those purposes.
Thank you. And I have a last question from M. Sanjayan from Conservation International. And that question is, one area of offsets, natural climate solutions, have huge potential as offsets, yet only attract 3% or so of the financing available. What is the panel's take on the role of nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions and its potential for cross-border funds for many countries in the global south? Who would
Boy,
like
Gates
to
really
start?
likes this question, so I'm smiling a lot.
Well, maybe start, since that's also my day job, in addition to what I'm doing on the task force. We can look at this as the problem, which it is $10 trillion, something like $3 trillion per year, that's needed in the developing economies to get them on track to meet the commitments that we all need to make to get to net zero. Only about 10% of that is making its way into the right hands at this point, and we understand the reasons why. And that was pre-pandemic. There's a country risk premium. There's questions about the efficacy of the implementation of some of the projects, and there's a history of projects that have been botched in one stage or other of their execution. It's absolutely critical that we deliver that financing into those hands with well-structured projects. Now, the other side of the equation is, if we're going to hit the sustainable development goals in the world, we need something like $50 trillion of capital to be deployed over the next 10 years. Right? And that's $50 trillion. And how much of that is available today? Well, most of it will become available, actually, through a combination of normal risk-return activities in markets, together with government actions. So think about blended finance, where governments are helping to catalyze this flow of money from the developed markets typically into.
And this is, again, why we watch these things to the end. $50 trillion via markets, motivated by what? Not just the banking lending agencies they're talking about, governments themselves. You could pick apart about 5 to 10 minutes of this where you get the agenda down pat. And he's letting, over the next 10 years, excuse me, $50 trillion.
The developing markets, where the bulk of the nature-based solutions are to be found. There's a role for banks to play in this. There's a role for capital markets. There's a role for governments. There's a role for multilateral institutions. But we can't wait too much longer because, as we understand, the candle is burning at both ends right now.
Thank you, Bill. We could go on. There's a lot of topics, fascinating conversation. I would like to thank you all for your engagement and for this great panel. For those who are following on TopLink, we will post the links if you want to read the full report of the task force or the summary. And I also want to highlight that as a follow-up to the task force report, the World Economic Forum has issued a report looking at the critical role of nature to deliver on net zero, and that we will be working to ensure high integrity, high quality nature-based solutions, which is a critical part of what we talked about today. So thank you all. You can find the recording of the session on the...
We did it. We got through the whole thing. I won't let you... I mean, you know where to find all this. Guys, I know it was painful, but if you enjoyed this video and my breakdown of what we're talking about here and the madness of what you just saw and the markets that they're trying to manipulate and create, just like every other market, how to have legitimacy through governance, stakeholder capitalism, 50 trillion in the market. It's all right there, baby. I mean, again, can't plant trees. Our water and our soil sucks, according to the globalists. It's unbelievable. These are the people that are supposedly protecting the planet, remember? But no, that's not the solution. No. $5, $10, $15, it means the world to me, guys. The GoFundMe, the Go Get Funding link is down below. GoFundMe got rid of me. Fully demonetized here. Thumbs the video up, subscribe, and share. Join the Burmist Brigade. Remember to Rockfin, Rockfin, Rockfin. Go create the free account. Although you can support me by becoming a premium member on Rockfin as well, getting everybody on Rockfin, and really, being a part of a revolutionary type of network that empowers creators. It doesn't enslave them. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, and Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, as well as Shade the Motion Picture, are all free right here, right now in the playlist section. And remember, everything is also backed up on Odyssey. Shout out to those guys for doing that for me. Very much appreciated. Absolutely love you guys.